We've heard from originators, rap educators, innovators, first of their kind with the rhyme with native inner nature, half animal, half divine, plan of a mastermind, channeling time in the image of its creator. To shine like the Batman sign at night, bright like that half-breed cop fighting crime on the mic, with real-life path superheroes. Bureaus were snooping through these lyricals for years with their Back to the Future weirdos. But we're still in the present, hanging through their earlobes to aim for the heart like Leila Steinberg shooting with Cupid's arrows. By the time devils learn binary code, they'll see we're the ones they need once they done reading the stupid zeros. That means we not on the same planet. They live on a flat earth, taught by their brain damage that dropped on them at birth and softened their game vantage. That focuses backwards. Their frame needs to change cameras, and it does. Now hold your applause, because I'm about to introduce the final keynote of the H2E2 Institute. The one who mentored Tupac when he was in his youth, whose impact is still being felt within the schools. Now, I've been able to connect with Leila on Clubhouse, thanks to Martha, for the past few months. And it's been amazing because she's been running her mic sessions, was able to pivot into the digital platform. And it's been amazing. And I've just been super inspired to hear from the youth that she's still working with and how they're almost like the model artists that we want to recruit for something like H2E2 because of the focus on emotional literacy and the work that she's been doing. It's really a key thing that every teacher should have as a prerequisite. And she's actively developing that through artists, through youth. And so I'm so glad that she can be with us on this inaugural institute and closing the day out for us. So without further ado, thank you, Leila. Take it away.
That was amazing. And thank you all for having me. It was awesome listening this whole time. I'm actually really inspired. I've always wanted to do stuff with Martha. You've been a blessing to have in our group. So yeah, thank you guys. This was awesome. Now I'm trying to figure out how I talk fast. My transition into technology wasn't good. I was very resistant. I think it took COVID for me to participate and make a commitment to show up. And so I am here. I'm not that good on Zoom, but I'm still doing it. Let's see, backtrack. I always say I was made in LA. I'm first generation. My mom says that her family moved from Mexico because my grandfather didn't want to have a dowry for his daughters. He didn't want to force his daughters into marrying people that they didn't love. And that, I was young and I remembered that, not quite understanding what that meant. And then my dad, who met my mom, they met when they were teenagers. My dad went to Dorsey, my mom went to LA High. And my father was a juvenile offender in Los Angeles and always got out of trouble because he had a family that was able to get him private attorneys. And I say that because I think that my early narrative and my childhood was very influenced by my mother and her desire to have liberation and my father's obsession with justice. And my dad went on to become the youngest public defender in the LA criminal courts. And so I grew up as a kid that went to court with my father all the time. I knew the judges in all three juvenile courts. And I saw my dad fighting for Black and brown children through my whole childhood. He brought every case to the dinner table. And like him, white kids that got in trouble always had private attorneys, and children of color were stuck with public defenders who often didn't understand who they served and were not as passionate about defending young people because they didn't experience the system the way that my dad did. So that I imagine was my inspiration and what drove me as a kid. And I went from 64th in Vermont to the La Cienega area to the beach in Malibu. So I had a migration from South Central and poverty to like the most privileged part of Malibu. And all I wanted to do was be in LA with my friends. So I used to take the bus. Inner City Cultural Center was on Vermont and Pico, or it was actually the street behind Vermont. But I would go to inner city and I would dance and listen to music. And I always wanted to be in every show. And I think that a lot of the teachers felt sorry for me. I wasn't as good. I was the pale person in the group. And slowly I became good enough to be included. And so I've been recently, because we're working on a lot of projects, looking at these pictures of me young. And it's funny. I'm like, oh my God, when people see these, I'm going to be really embarrassed. But so I would say the Inner City Cultural Center shaped me and really gave me a space and helped me with feeling like I had a home. I was an identity challenged girl from Los Angeles that probably wanted to be a boy in my youth. And so as I have recently been really looking at what brought me to hip hop, I would say that I was married young, and my husband was a DJ in Los Angeles. He worked with a lot of the early groups, Uncle Jam's Army, LA Dream Team, Egyptian Lover. And I was always supporting and helping him with his DJ business. But I got asked to tour in a Nigerian band. And I bring that up because in a lot of my interviews and a lot of the talking I've done over the years, I realize I haven't given credit and acknowledgement to my elders and my teachers who helped me understand how important this erupting art form was. So I toured with a Nigerian band that had a number of South African members. And so early on in the anti-apartheid movement, I began to learn from African artists the power of music in support of activism and revolution. And so in a nutshell, that is what brought me to want to work in hip hop. Fast forward, my mom moved to the Bay Area when I was young. I packed up 2 small children, and my husband and I moved to the Bay Area. We were 45 minutes north of Oakland in an area, Roanoke Park, Santa Rosa area. And I was helping him with his music and his DJing, but I had this idea, because my children were going to be in school, that we couldn't have an educational system that was relevant for my children, because they took what I was challenged to another level. And I didn't feel that we could educate children holistically in the educational system I grew up in. And I went to LA schools that had nothing and very affluent schools that supplemented everything we didn't have. So I juggled 2 educations, 2 systems. So I'm going to start speaking really fast. I know we're almost out of time. I, in the late 80s, came up with an idea for doing school assemblies where we could have really difficult conversations in the assemblies, and I wouldn't be tied to the school system. And I would raise money by doing shows with artists that I knew so that I could afford to travel and do assemblies in all the schools. And that's really how it started for me. I began to bring artists that I knew. At the time, I kept looking for an artist who could speak to the subjects and what I thought would be great to supplement in assemblies. That's the point where I met Tupac, and we began to grow what now, all these years later. I was born in 1961. What year is this now? Gosh, I'm 60 this year. It's kind of crazy. But so what I do now, I still manage artists, I still work in the industry, but I do that so I can afford to do what I'm passionate about. I believe that all of us have to begin to understand that we need social emotional learning. We need to do heart work. And so I 30 years ago began to create curriculum around emotional literacy, working with hip hop as a means to introduce these concepts. And in 1990, I started working in San Quentin. I've been working in the prisons and the juvenile halls for all this time. I won't ever stop until I'm gone. I think I'm getting pushed out of the management by my youngest daughter. She's 31. She works with a lot of artists. I still manage Earl, but she's probably pushing me out of that too. And I just wanted to join you all today, just so you know I'm a resource. I'll show up anytime there's kids. If you guys have classes and you want me in a class, I never say no to kids. I think that in an instant you can just change a child's life. And I wore Malcolm today because I think that especially in my time with Pac, and understanding that if you're a child of the Panthers, you are given a book list and required reading. And one thing I did was grow up in a house where reading was a requirement. And I think he symbolizes transformation and accountability and the ability to be honest and say, I made a mistake. And that's the other thing that I want to be able to talk a lot about, because we made a lot of mistakes. We were young. The industry is really toxic. And I want to see us separate how toxic and unhealthy this industry is from the incredible artists that have given their lives and their hearts so that we actually can have these conversations, and that we realize that mental health in the artist community is so fragile, and usually brilliant artists are broken people. And so I really focus a lot on what it is to be healthy, which is why I still work with Earl. I think he is a really important artist and voice, and him and I have a pretty wild history that I hope to share when there's more time next time. So I think we're almost out of time. I don't know if there's anyone that had questions. There's so much I would have shared, but.
I just want to chime in, Leila, and just let you know that this whole session is being recorded. So I don't know, Martha. I mean, I don't have any problem with you taking whatever time that you want, because we're, because we're documenting this. So it's important.
Yes, and you still have 10 minutes, actually 13 minutes.
Okay, I'm talking so fast because I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I'm supposed to be done by now. Is there anything specific or any questions anyone wants to ask me? Because I can probably ramble for so long. I've been doing this for so long.
Well, you've been working in schools for a long time. How did you get to start your workshops in schools?
I initially went, and I had, the funny thing is I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what it was to be a promoter or anything, but I knew a lot of artists in the business and I had performed a lot. So when I went to Northern California, my daughter was in elementary school, and I went to the principal and asked if I could do an assembly. And I wrote a proposal, and the topics at the time I wanted to talk about were race, justice, and what I always talk about, and that's the heart. And she said, okay. And so I did my first assembly, and the kids, I brought amazing artists, and I always made myself the keynote at that time. And so I talked, and then we inserted art, and we had a 90-minute assembly, incorporated the kids into it. And it was better than I expected. And I realized that through assemblies, we could talk about anything as long as we kept it respectful and we addressed key points. And that's how it started. And then I decided to throw a show with all of our friends from LA that were in music. So I had JJ Fad come up, Rodney O. I just brought people up and did a show at the fairgrounds, and 5,000 kids came because Santa Rosa didn't have hip hop. There was no music events at the time in Northern California, far north, that were anything like that. And I honestly didn't know what I was doing. And the funny thing is, the very first show I did, I hired someone to do security, really didn't know anything about what I was doing. I was following the rules. And the person that I hired to do security, someone came to get in the show, and it was someone that he had a problem with from the past. And the guy went to the car to get his gun to shoot my security person, and he tripped and he shot himself in the groin. So we made the newspapers because that happened, and suddenly it just opened a whole door. All these people started calling, asking if they could come and do shows with us. So I literally accidentally fell into what it was to be someone that produced an event and began to promote. And I understood pretty clearly, because of my parents and their activism, that this was an art form erupting out of Black pain and Black struggle, and business models didn't exist to support Black business where there was Black ownership in spaces where there were Black creatives. And so one of the things that I wanted to support and contribute to was not being somebody that added to the long list of people who exploited artists, especially because I had spent so much time touring with African artists. So I, not thinking I would be in the business, but thinking that I learned a lot. My uncle was a big campaign manager for a lot of different politicians when I was young. And I would intern for him and help him in the summers. And I began to learn about how we handle political campaigns, and that it doesn't matter if someone's qualified or good or not. It was all in how you market. And back then they did telemarketing. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have access. So you would buy lists from people. And so, and I always think my uncle's gonna watch me speaking one day, but I basically stole all his data back then, and began to look at how we organized data for political campaigns. And so I began to help people I knew in the industry on the ground with what I thought were their political campaigns. And so that was really how I merged these assemblies, the fundraisers I would do for artists so that we could fund our own work in the schools, and then helping to develop careers without realizing that's what happened. And there was a woman in Marin County, she had an organization called Young Imaginations, and it was a multicultural organization that had programs in the classroom. And so I went and asked her if I could take my assembly model and actually get into the classroom. And that was in 1989. And that's when I kind of launched my program in the classroom. And so now it's been 30 plus years of that evolving, and my training the teacher model for the emotional literacy curriculum. And then with Pac, I always felt like every song he wrote was curriculum. So then outside of my work with the emotional literacy curriculum, I began to teach workshops based on his song titles. So I would do Brenda's Got a Baby or Papa's Song, or his early songs became like curriculum when I was in the classroom. And then in 1990, I went and did an assembly on the yard in San Quentin. I was invited by one of the men that was incarcerated. He had a life sentence. He heard about our assemblies. And I went in with a group of rappers that I was working with. And he pulled me to the side after the assembly, and he said, I look at you and it's like you have dynamite in one hand or diamonds in the other, and you're about to lead my people off a cliff. and you're marketing violence, you're participating in the destruction of community and family. And I'm pissed off I invited you guys. And I think you should come in and start studying with men that are doing life and re-examine your responsibility with the artists that you work with. And so that was the beginning of my working in San Quentin. I would go in twice a month. I'd meet with a group of men doing life. And I began to look through a different lens at some of the artists that I work with, because I was really good at making excuses for a lot of the things we did. The early artists I work with, the industry was built on illegal business because no one would support hip hop in its early days. And so there were things that I knew were wrong, people we took money from that I knew we should have waited or done differently. And then I began to deal with the guys in San Quentin and looking at the fact that we were destroying families. We were making excuses for things that weren't okay. And so I began to change how I worked and who I worked with. And when my early days with Pac, I never wanted to manage or be in the business. I didn't really see that that was something I'd be interested in or that I'd be good at. And Ray Love and Pac convinced me that I would be great. And I did it not because I believed them, but because I believed in them. And so, yeah, I want to read someone's question here. What advice do you have for new upcoming artists, producers in high schools? Let me see. That's a long answer, but I actually, a lot of the teachers now that are working with me in the curriculum are incredible artists, but may not make it traditionally in the industry. So I think that there's incredible opportunities for artists to actually be facilitators, to do the work that you all are doing. When I spoke at the International Hip Hop Conference in the Netherlands, maybe 10 years ago, they took me to their academy. They had the first master's program in hip hop. And I thought that was so strange that this was an art form that came from our country that I grew up in. And I had to go overseas to see it taken so seriously that they had developed so many programs around implementing hip hop in traditional education. And so that's why I think Martha and Ramon and all of you that are here today are doing such important work, because to have legacy and to change the trajectory of education, you have to be in the institutions to do it. And so I dreamed about this 30 years ago, and it's actually living and breathing now. And I don't have the qualifications most of you have to implement it in the way that you're doing, but I'm here for you and would love to support and be part of what any of you are doing. Is there any more questions? I know I talked too long. And
no, you're good. You're good. There is one more question from Benjamin. Bay Area hip hop has its own culture / identity. What aspects of Bay hip hop do you feel are of particular importance to continue and build upon as it relates to schools?
The Bay is so important. The Bay, even though I'm from LA, the Bay is where I got my start. And the activism and the revolutionaries that have made the biggest changes in this country were birthed in the Bay. The work that I did with African artists, the anti-apartheid work, it was leveraged in the Bay Area. So I always say that LA is kind of the communication center because we have Hollywood, but the Bay is the home of the revolutionaries. And so just in terms of what the Bay has had to offer, many artists, not just hip hop, but across the board, I think if we want to understand our revolutionaries, I think that we have to take a deep look at the Bay Area. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I would say that that's one of the most important things that that the Bay did for me as someone who understands that I have a responsibility, and I got that from the Bay. I didn't get that from LA. Did that answer your question? Yes. Okay. You know, I need glasses, you guys, but I get nervous, and so I can't put on my glasses, and I always forget to look at my notes when I'm on the computer. But that's why I'm bending forward. I can see it now, though.
Leila, you kind of touched on it with your work in San Quentin. I threw a question in the chat because we heard from Ed Campos and Elizabeth Norris earlier about the work with in the juvenile facility, but for our incarcerated youth. How can we work together to address that population?
I'm always interested, and people can hit me up directly. I would say that the way that I penetrated and got into all the halls was definitely my relationships and my dad's history. I couldn't have done it by myself. It's very difficult to get in the way that I was able to get in, and the fact that I was able to film for 30 years. They definitely didn't let people come in with cameras and film, but I wanted to be able to document how important this work was. And so because of my dad, I was able to really get in and to do a lot. And I have 30 years of footage just sitting. San Quentin, I have literally for 30 years, they let me tape, which is amazing. And I'm hoping to do something with all this footage one day. I haven't figured that out yet. But I do have enough history inside that I can be an asset for people who want to go in. I stopped going inside because of COVID, but I have an incredible group of artists. Almost all the guys in the lifers unit. Lonnie got out last month or 2 months ago. He did 42 years, I think. And he was the last in my group of lifers that finally got out. And so now all the guys I work with are on the outside working. And they're all down and always interested in working. And so I think it's a longer conversation, but I could get together on Zoom if you guys want to do a specific Zoom around working inside. If you need resources or relationships, I'm down. And I'm always down to come, do it with you. So
I think that's a great idea. Just like we're going to have one for hip hop ed tech, we should have one just focused on justice involved programs. So yes, and you have, I think you already have someone who wants to bring you to their school through Zoom, Ed Campos. We would love to have you connect via Zoom with our students, if that's possible.
Yeah, I'm down. All you have to, my name at Gmail or Roman or Martha, if they could connect with you and get my info.
Yeah, we're gonna share a list of everybody's emails, and we'll have a newsletter that the H2E2 initiative members will receive.
I'm super down. I really have admired your work for so long. So I thank you for having me. I really appreciate that you all included me. And next time I'd like to share more about Earl and the things I've learned from this new generation of artists. And we're in a different place. So I think it's exciting, and the kids are coming in with a new knowledge and a new commitment. So
well, tell us a little bit about Earl.
It would be such a long story to tell you my journey with him, but it's just so funny because I'll at least tell you, I first met him, he was 13 at the Boys and Girls Club in Santa Monica. And I thought, I usually, kids who want to be in the industry resonate with me because I have a history, I know people. And my son and everyone would always point to him and say, oh, he's the most talented. So I went up to him one day and I was like, hey, I do these mic sessions and, everyone says you're really talented. I think that, you'd be great to come participate. He rolled his eyes and looked at me. He was just like, what? And brushed me off and walked away. And I was so embarrassed. It was very humbling. And so this was when he was 13. We all live in the same community. Fast forward, he starts working with Tyler. He puts his video out. It's going viral. Everybody's talking about it. And I'm like, oh my God, that was a kid that was so rude to me. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I don't like his video anyways. So what if he didn't come? The funny thing about our story is that he didn't even know who I was and didn't care to. He was so irritated that I even had the nerve to come talk to him. And the one thing that I've done well is work with kids who get caught up in the system. And I'm an approved community service organization, so kids can get their hours with me. So I can offer kids something that get in trouble and surround them with mentorship and folks that can support them. And so he got in trouble at school. At the same time that he got in trouble, his video was going viral. And he actually thought he could get emancipated, leave school, and go become a famous rapper. And his mother wanted him to graduate high school and to stop messing up. So she actually, when he got in trouble at school at New Roads, one of the things that the principal does is, you know, tell the parents, you got to put him in a program or do something or he won't be able to stay in the school. So she sent him to Utah to do a habilitation program. It was supposed to be for 2 weeks, but he tried to run away and he wouldn't cooperate and he didn't want to go back to school. And so someone told her about this program in Samoa, and she decided that she was going to save her son and make sure he finished school. And he was getting high and just not doing well. And so he just got snatched out of his whole life and completely removed from what he thought he'd be doing. So the funny thing is, I've been doing work a lot with Professor Armour at USC Law. So I knew his mother, I admired her work. And I got a call from a friend of mine that was on the board of the school he was at. And he said, hey, you know, a good friend of mine's son is in trouble and he's not cooperating and I think you could help. So I end up at a meeting and I have no clue what the meeting is or who I'm meeting with. And then it's his mother telling me their journey and what was going on and that he was now in Samoa and not cooperating. And I was like, oh my God, that's the kid that was so mean to me. I don't know if I could help. We'd have to talk first. So anyway, they set up a phone call and we get on the phone and he's got no idea who he's talking to, but they tell him about me. And at the facility, they happen to have Tupac's poetry book and a few other books. So he had just read the book and knew my name, still didn't know I was the person from the Boys and Girls Club. And so I talk to him and I say, you know, I can help you and I can help you get out of there. And I'll even fly to Samoa and come get you. But do you remember me? And I reminded him of who I was and how rude he was to me. It was just really funny. So that was our beginning. And I ended up helping him complete his levels. I went halfway across the world with a group of artists. We worked in the facility in Western Samoa, and then I brought him back home to finish his last year of high school. And we've been together ever since. And my next conversation about him would be all the things I've learned from him in these last 9 years. And that he was my opportunity to get the things right that I didn't when I was working and I was young with all of the Bay Area artists, including Tupac. And so it's been a beautiful journey and quite a lesson. And now my 31-year-old, my youngest daughter, she actually is the only reason I was able to manage Earl and work with the artists that I have over the last 10 years, because I'm not very good in a digital space. And to work in music now, you really have to understand how to navigate this space. And so she's really kept that part together. And I've really taken all that I learned and what I was saying earlier about mental health and that we all need to look at how we're broken and take responsibility for our own healing and our own mental health. And so with Earl, I've been able to put into practice what was theory for me and ideas for many years. And his health and his life were a lot more important than our business and deals. And so I'm thankful that he's allowed me an opportunity to get it right. And I hope to pass the things I've learned, so that we don't just look at the value of this art form, but the value of the human beings that give so much to it, and that we train the next generation of people who are doing business for artists, to stop having artists just be product, and this whole mentality that we have had in this industry that is one of the most toxic industries, and that we begin to shift the entire way that we do business in this industry, because our artists are not responsible to be our leaders. We are responsible to analyze their voices, support them, and then to do the work, and not expect them to be our leaders. And we do that, and it's not fair. So I don't know, I hope I gave you guys something, and that this was okay. I'm not the best on Zoom, but thank you.
You were wonderful. Thank you so much. Raman, you want to say some final words?
Oh, just that it's been so amazing these past couple of days to know the network and the team that we're building. We're all going to need each other to create the new system that we all know is possible. And so I'm just extremely humbled that everybody who has participated, and I know there's a ton of other people that wish they were here, but the fact that we're documenting this really for history's sake, so that people can reference back and know that we were having these conversations in 2020 and coming together 2021, at this time. Like, there's no going back, to the old ways if we're having these conversations today. And so, just extremely grateful to everybody for showing up. I'm really excited to see what we can build moving forward.